From the AM/FM 24/7 radio network, broadcasting from AM and FM stations around the country. Welcome to the Small Business Administration award-winning School for Startups Radio, where we talk all things small business and entrepreneurship. Now, here is your host, the guy that believes anyone can be a successful entrepreneur, because entrepreneurship is not about creativity, risk, or passion, Jim Beach.
And welcome back to School for Startups Radio. Again, thank you so much for being with us. I am very excited to introduce you to my next guest. You're going to love or hate this story, but I promise you that it will be one of the most fascinating things that you ever hear. Graham Hancock was a reporter for the Economist magazine in East Africa in the early 80s. And he ran across a man, a monk, who claimed to be the guard of the Ark of the Covenant. You remember the thing from the Indiana Jones movie, right? And he spent some time studying this, and he published a book in 1992 called The Sign and the Seal, A Quest for the Lost Ark of the Covenant, which was an incredibly provocative, best-selling book. And after that, he soon followed up with his most important book called The Fingerprints of the Gods, which has sold, I think, something like 5 to 6 million copies around the world. It has been translated, 7 million copies, and it's been translated into 30 languages. He has spent an entire career now talking about this book, defending it. He has had BBC specials made about him. He has had all sorts of incredible life events because of it, and he has a new book out now called The Magicians of the Gods. It is all about where we came from as a society, and it has some claims that history and archaeologists are really, really struggling to denounce. But I think his book is a pretty definitive explanation of this. Sir, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hi, Jim. Nice to be with you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, I am blown away by the book. Let's tell quickly, everyone, what is the central thesis of Magicians of the Gods?
That we are a species with amnesia, that an entire episode of the human story, an advanced civilization that was capable of exploring and mapping the world, existed during the Ice Age, when our ancestors are supposed to have been simple, nomadic hunter-gatherers, incapable of any scientific feats or any large-scale construction projects, and that this advanced civilization was destroyed by a cataclysmic event, a sustained cataclysmic event that unfolded between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. Geologists call this event the Younger Dryas. We already know that it was accompanied by massive animal extinctions, huge extinctions of the megafauna, the woolly mammoths, the rhinos, and so on and so forth, and also by a radical and inexplicable plunge in global temperatures. And for a long time, scientists have been trying to understand what caused this mysterious event between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. And the science is now in. There's a very, very solid body of scientific evidence has been published in the peer-reviewed press since 2007 that evidences the impact of several fragments of a comet with the North American ice cap 12,800 years ago, which set this disaster in motion. The epicenter was North America, but in fact it was a global cataclysm, almost on the level of the extinction of the dinosaurs, and I contend it wiped out an advanced civilization that now is only remembered in myths and traditions.
And the advanced civilization that you're talking about, it includes so many myths. It's Atlantis. It is, according to the book, also related to the Sphinx, the pyramids in Giza in Egypt, but it also left other, and perhaps Stonehenge, it left other archaeological sites around the world, some of which were hidden on purpose. Tell us about, and I don't know how to pronounce this, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Tell us about that.
In southeastern Turkey. Well, As I just need to preface that with a little bit more information on this cataclysm. As I said, it was between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. There were two spikes. The first spike was 12,800 years ago, animal extinctions and a big rise in sea level. The second spike, 11,600 years ago, more animal extinctions and an even more dramatic rise in sea level, which geologists call meltwater pulse 1b. Interestingly, 11,600 years ago is the date that the German Archaeological Institute has now established for the foundation of an extraordinary megalithic site in Turkey, which, as you rightly say, is Göbekli Tepe. And this site is 11,600 years old. If you envisage something like Stonehenge in England, but 50 times larger, then that's what we're looking at Göbekli Tepe. The intriguing thing is that there's no background to it. It just comes out of nowhere. In the case of Stonehenge, we supposedly have a settled agricultural community generating surpluses, in which specialists could arise, stonemasons and so on, division of labor, to create a big megalithic site. But in the case of Göbekli Tepe, the people are only hunter-gatherers in that area, and then suddenly pops up this extraordinary megalithic site with huge T-shaped pillars weighing up to 50 tons, and no background to it whatsoever. At the same moment, agriculture suddenly appears in southeast Turkey and spreads very rapidly. Now, I suggest rather than some astonishingly inspired group of hunter-gatherers magically equipped with the skills to undertake a very large construction project and invent agriculture, that we're looking at the transfer of technology here, and that this is a project of the survivors of a lost civilization who settle amongst hunter-gatherers and attempt to transfer their skills to them. And we see the effects of this. The best work at Göbekli Tepe is the oldest, which itself is counterintuitive. The site runs for about 1,000 years, and then, equally mysteriously, it's deliberately and meticulously buried. Everything is covered up. Actually, 50 times as much is still under the ground as has already been excavated, but they've been over the site with ground-penetrating radar and seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these huge pillars beneath the ground. So it was deliberately buried, and then for more than 10,000 years it was untouched until the German Archaeological Institute discovered it in the second half of the 1990s and began excavation. It's a very mysterious site, and it can't be explained within the existing model of history, but unfortunately the existing model of history hasn't yet caught up with the evidence of the cataclysm, and that cataclysm occurs right in the foundations of what is thought of as the historical story.
And this cataclysm, is it what a lot of people would call the flood?
Well, yes, indeed it is, because it involved a massive global sea level rise. Of course, among scientists, any references to the flood, to biblical superstitions, are regarded as alarming and unwise, and that's part of the reason why it's difficult for science to adapt to catastrophist ideas. Science defined itself by separating itself off from religion and from notions like the flood of Noah. So to find ourselves confronted with evidence of such a flood creates a bit of an uncomfortable situation, particularly since 11,600 years ago. Second spike of the cataclysm is also the date that Plato gives for the destruction and submergence of the lost civilization of Atlantis. He said that happened 9,000 years before the time of the Greek lawmaker Solon. Solon lived in 600 BC, so that's 9,600 BC or 11,600 BC, 11,600 years ago. So if Plato made it up, as he's accused of doing, he was astonishingly on the money with the latest science.
All right. I have to ask, this is one of the things that I keep thinking about. Does your research give us any indication of where these advanced civilizations came from in the first place? You know, I watch the Discovery Channel and BBC, and sometimes you'll hear that aliens came and taught us how to build pyramids and gave us agriculture and stuff. Or you could.
I don't buy into the ancient astronaut model at all. I don't need ancient astronauts. I've spent more than a quarter of a century traveling around the world studying the most mysterious and amazing archaeological sites on Earth, and I haven't seen anything that could only be explained by a civilization with the level of technology needed to cross interstellar space. What I see is evidence for the fingerprints of a lost human civilization, which was much more advanced than history presently allows for the period of time involved for the Ice Age. A human civilization with human concerns, capable of making human error. Human beings just like us, anatomically modern humans, have lived on this planet for at least 200,000 years. And I think that just as we today coexist with hunter-gatherer peoples such as the tribes of the Amazon or the Kalahari Desert, so it was in the Ice Age that an advanced civilization coexisted with hunter-gatherer peoples. And it was the hunter-gatherer peoples, preferentially, who survived the cataclysm, perhaps because hunter-gatherers do have extraordinary survival skills, whereas specialized civilized people often don't know how to hunt and fish and, make huts and plant crops.
Right. My wife and I joke that if there were a cataclysm today, that we would be the first people to die because our advanced cooking skills, Graham, include reservations at the Ritz-Carlton for dinner. And that's, so.
Exactly. And it's an interesting thought because we feel we have a very strong civilization today, and we do, but its strength is its specialism. And the fact that people are so specialized means that if the bonds of society are broken by a cataclysmic event, our civilization would in fact be very fragile, whereas the hunter-gatherers of the Kalahari or of the Amazon rainforest would hardly be touched.
Right. All right. So, and you mentioned that there may be another cataclysm, and I definitely want to get back to that. But assume that we were told, and let's assume that this advanced civilization 12,000 years ago knew that something was going to happen. Why would we bury the existence of ourselves? It seems like we would try to create time capsules so that people would know that we were here and know how advanced we were. I wouldn't want to have no record of our civilization today. Why did the ancient, very advanced cultures hide themselves?
They didn't really. Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. But another site that I and my colleagues in this field have long felt has been wrongly dated is the Great Sphinx of Giza, which is a classic in Egypt, which is a classic megalithic monument carved out of solid rock. The Great Sphinx, there's much evidence to suggest that it was originally entirely a lion monument, a monument representing a huge lion facing east, that it was reworked and restored by the ancient Egyptians in the historic period around 2500 BC when they recut the head of the lion and carved it into the head of a human being. But the weathering patterns on the flanks of the Sphinx and of the trench that surrounds it have been studied by Professor Robert Schoch, professor of geology at Boston University, and he points out that this monument at some point in its career was subjected to more than 1,000 years of extremely heavy rainfall, and we've not had such rains in Egypt on the Giza Plateau in the last 5,000 years. Indeed, you have to go back to this cataclysmic time around 12,000 years ago to get the prolonged rainout that could have scarred the Sphinx in the way that it is scarred. So the hard science of geology suggests that the Sphinx is much older. It's been staring us in the face, evidence for a lost civilization, but archaeology has co-opted it to the later ancient Egyptian civilization, hence our confusion. In fact, I think there are many megalithic sites around the world that have been misunderstood and misdated. There's no direct way to date stone. Archaeologists have to use carbon dating of organic material, and sometimes that organic material can have been introduced by a later culture.
All right. I've been to the Sphinx, and it certainly is confusing to me. I don't really know enough to challenge any of the views, but it seems to me that what you're saying could be very plausible. I mentioned a minute ago that there could be another cataclysm coming. Can you speak of that?
I do speak of that because a group of astronomers, including Victor Clube, Bill Napier, who's professor of astronomy at the University of Cardiff in Britain, and a number of other scientists have been paying attention to the Taurid meteor stream, which our planet passes through twice a year. The Taurid meteor stream is the remnant of a fragmented giant comet. And the evidence is that this is the same comet, fragments of which hit the Earth 12,800 years ago. Further fragments hit the Earth 11,600 years ago. The most recent impact was in 1908. On the 30th of June, 1908, the Tunguska incident fortunately, which happened over an uninhabited area of Siberia. Just a little bit of rock fell out of the torrid meteor stream in 1908, but it flattened 80 million trees across an area larger than London. So if that had happened over an inhabited area, we'd all be much more concerned about the torrid meteor stream today. And the calculations of the astronomers and the mathematicians who work with them indicate that there are still several large bits of the original giant comet in the torrid meteor stream, and that each passage through the torrid meteor stream exposes us to risk, rather like strapping on a blindfold and crossing a 6-lane interstate twice a year and just hoping that we don't meet any traffic, or that if we do, it would be motorcycles rather than trucks. The calculations indicate that there's one piece in there that might be 20 miles wide, and this would have a devastating effect on human civilization if it were to hit us. It's not gloom and doom. We have the technology to deal with this. At least 10 different technologies exist that could be deployed to sweep our cosmic environment clean, but at the moment we're not making that choice. We choose to spend the big bucks on other things, particularly military expenditure, and we've rather got our eye off the ball. It could be done, but right now the choice is not being made. Presently, the international community is spending roughly what it costs to run one McDonald's for a year on observing potentially dangerous objects in our cosmic environment, and that's not good enough. We need to change that.
Well, McDonald's is pretty important. Maybe that'll be the thing that we pass on to another advanced civilizations.
Yes, they were a strange culture that worshipped arches.
Yes,
worshipped golden arches. Yes, that's right. That's what we'll be remembered of in 10,000 years from now, when we're the next lost civilization.
All right, a little more seriously, why have you and your books been so heavily criticized? It seems to me that you're not a nut job. You're an Economist reporter, one of the most prestigious institutions out there, one of the most esteemed periodicals of all time. Your pedigree is flawless. Your research is incredibly well documented. It seems to me that the case that you are making would be something that science would go, my goodness, thank you for this fantastic work. What's the underlying cause of the criticism?
The nature of science itself. There's a great book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, which outlines this. Actually, all scientists read it, but then they forget it. And what it shows is that science doesn't proceed with gradual and friendly acceptance of new ideas. When new ideas are proposed that are contrary to the existing view, they are ruthlessly attacked, sometimes for more than a century. Before they are accepted. It initiates a kind of territorial reaction on the part of the scientists who are invested in a particular worldview, and an attack on that worldview is taken almost as an existential attack upon themselves. And this is very normal human behavior. We all get invested in ideas, and we all defend those ideas. Look at what people do in the name of religion, for goodness sake. So I think it's quite normal. I'm proposing an extraordinary hypothesis. I've been patient. I've been working on this for a quarter of a century now. The first big book, you rightly said, was Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995. 20 years have passed now. It's 2015. I brought in a mass of new evidence, and new scientific evidence, mainstream science, not woo-woo, which supports the case that I made. And I'm hoping that this time around that somebody will actually read the book seriously, rather than, just dismissing me as a member of the lunatic fringe, because I happen to hold ideas that are different from theirs.
Right. Let me ask you something that has nothing to do with the book, but you're the type guy that would know this. Global warming, what is your perspective on that? You've studied cataclysmic destruction of the Earth.
Yeah.
Do you buy into global warming?
My perspective on global warming is that it is happening, but that we are not clear about the causes. One thing that I know is that there have been incredible spikes of warming and freezing during the past. The Younger Dryas episode that I talked about between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago is one of those. I think that there are large factors at work involving the solar system as a whole, and that the human contribution to this may well be part of it, but it's not by any means the whole story. Nevertheless, philosophically, the way we're behaving on the planet, the radical burning of fossil fuels, the pollution, the complete disregard for this beautiful garden that the universe has gifted us with, that's a mistake. That's a philosophical error. We shouldn't be doing that. Whether or not it contributes to global warming, we should be living more moderately. That should be a choice that we make on the grounds that it's right to do so, rather than to profligately continue to exploit and burn up the resources of the planet.
That makes a lot of sense. I completely agree with you. All right. Ark of the Covenant. Is that real?
Yeah.
Is the Indiana Jones, and I don't mean to, say that that's the real story, but certainly that's what we associate it with in modern culture.
Yeah.
Does that ark exist?
Well, that was a book that I published in 1992 called The Sign and the Seal. It was the first book I wrote about a historical mystery. And again, what I do is listen to what people say, listen to the mythology, listen to the traditions, and look at what there is on the ground. Ethiopia is the only country in the world that actually claims to possess the Ark of the Covenant, and that has it as the centerpiece in its religious system. So I thought this is something really worth taking a look at. Scholars dismissed it. They thought it was a bad idea that the Ethiopians had just made it up. But when you look at issues like the Falashas, the black Jews of Ethiopia who practice an Old Testament form of Judaism, when you look at the fact that every single Christian church in Ethiopia, more than 20,000 of them, has a replica of the Ark of the Covenant in its Holy of Holies, obviously there's a story here. And I think the Ethiopians make a very good case, and I presented that case in my 1992 book. It set me on the path that eventually led me to Magicians of the Gods Today. I moved out of current affairs because of that book in 1992 and became interested in investigating the mysteries of the past. And that's really what the new book, Magicians of the Gods, is all about.
All right. And so I have to ask this. Has this process made you into a religious person? Were you a religious person in the first place? Is this too personal a question, sir?
No, it's not too personal a question. I don't adhere to any of the mainstream religions. I regard Christianity, Judaism, and Islam as huge bureaucracies that are in the business of dividing us all from one another and have very little, in many cases, to do with spirituality. But I do regard myself as a spiritual person. I don't believe that death is the end. I can't prove that. But my strong instinct is that we are souls, we are spirits manifesting in human bodies, having a human experience, here to learn and to grow and develop in this university of duality, and then moving on to the next level of existence. That's my belief. I can't prove it. I have reasons for it, but I wouldn't call it a religion.
All right. Well, then, is there a God that gave us the Ark in Ethiopia?
I have no idea. The Ark of the Covenant, as it's described in the Bible, sounds like a piece of technology. It's a weapon of destruction. Just touch it and you get slapped down with a bolt of fire. It was used constantly in warfare. I make the case that the Ark of the Covenant is a piece of lost technology from a lost civilization to which religious and spiritual ideas were subsequently attached.
All right. Fantastic. Sir, it's been an honor to speak with you. I love reading your work. It's been on my shelf for 10 years, and I have absolutely enjoyed my time with the Magicians of the Gods, which just came out and is selling incredibly well on Amazon and is incredibly well reviewed. Thank you for spending some time with us today, and congratulations on your incredible success.
My pleasure. And my website is grahamhancock.com. There's loads of information on the book there.
Perfect. Thank you for mentioning that. I appreciate that. Any social media you would like us to follow you on, or is it just the website?
Yes, on my website there are links to my author Facebook page, and I'm very active on my author Facebook page, so that's a good place for people to get in touch with me.
Fantastic. Graham Hancock, thank you so much for spending some time with us, and I wish you a happy holiday season.
Thank you very much. Same to you. Thanks for having me on the show.
It has been our honor.
Taking care of business.